Hey guys, in this tutorial we're going to show you how to create a multi-item image slider with Tiny Slider. And we're actually going to go beyond Tiny Slider. We're going to show you how to add a header, how to add custom buttons, information about your particular image, and even how to take the user over to another page so they can learn more about that particular image, or in this case, about that particular city. Alright guys, before we get started, we want to bring in the Font Awesome and also the Tiny Slider CDN. So let's open up our browser and we're going to search for Font Awesome CDN. Let's click on the link by cdnjs.com. Let's copy this URL by clicking on that button there. Now we're going to go back over here. We're going to type in link and Control V to paste the URL. Alright, now we're going to search for the Tiny Slider. It's going to be this one here. Go ahead and click on it. And we're going to need these first two URLs. So we're going to start with this one. We're going to click on that to copy that. Let's go back over here and we're going to create a script tag. Type in src and then we're going to Control V to paste that URL in there. All right, now let's copy this one. Let's go back over here. And this time we're going to type in link, enter, and then Control V to paste that in there. All right, we can exit out of here. And we now have the Font Awesome and the Tiny Slider CDN. So we can now begin our HTML here. We're going to start off by creating a section and we're going to give this an ID with a name of slider. All right, now we're going to create a container and a subcontainer. So these two classes are going to help us make this responsive on big screen sizes. All right, now let's create a wrapper where the buttons and also the slider are going to go. So we're going to create two classes that are going to go in here. The first one, we're going to give it a class name of controller, and this is where the title is going to go. I'm going to use an h2 here, and I'm just going to type top rated cities since this is going to be a slider about different cities in the United States. All right. So right under here is where we're going to create the actual buttons. I'm going to give those an ID name of controls. And let's create our first button here. We're going to give this one a class name of previous. Let's Shift Alt down to copy that. And this is going to be the next button. All right, so for these two buttons, we're going to be using an icon. So let's open up our browser and we're going to search for Font Awesome. Let's click on icons. And we're going to search for the angle left. This one here. So go ahead and click on it. And we're going to click on this to copy the HTML. All right, so we're going to Control V to paste that in here. We can actually do the same thing for the next button. Only for this one, we're going to change the left to right. All right, let's exit out of here. There are the two icons that we need, and we are done with adding the title and the buttons. So right under the controller class here is where we're going to create our slider. So we're going to add a class with a name of my slider. All right, so this is where our slides are going to go. So we're going to start this off by creating a div with no class name. And now we're going to create a div with a class name of slide. All right, inside of this slide, we're going to add the image and also the information about the image. So we're going to start off by creating the div where the image is going to go. We're going to give that a name of slide img. And we're actually going to add another class name as well. We're going to call it img1. And the reason we're doing this is so we can give this particular div its own unique image. So as we create more of these, we're going to call them like image 2, image 3, image 4, so on and so forth. All right, so in here, we're going to add a link, and this is completely optional, but I'm just showing you that you can actually add more things to the Tiny Slider than what actually just comes with a CDN. All right, So this is going to say learn more. That way when the user hovers over the image, they can see that they can actually click on it. Right, and this is a link, but of course we're not going to be creating the actual page where the user can get redirected to, because I'm going to leave that completely up to you. Right, so we're done with adding the image. Now below this, we're going to create another div, and this is where the information about the image is going to go. Let's actually create a space. That way there's a space between the image and the information. All right, and here I'm going to use an H3, and for this first one, I'm going to be using an image from the state of California, and now we're going to add the city. So this image is about Los Angeles, so I'm going to be adding that in there. All right, we now have our first slide beginning from this div that does not have a class down to here. So we're going to select all of that, and we're going to Shift Alt down to copy that 4 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to go back to the very top. So this is the first one. This is number 2, so we're going to change this to IMG2. And I'm going to go ahead and change the state here. This is New York, and the city as well. And this is going to be New York as well. All right, this is image number 3, and the state stays the same on that one. And the city is the city of San Francisco. All right, image number 4. Let's change the state here to South Dakota, and this is going to be the city of Keystone. All right, last but not least, image number 5, and this is going to be the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago. I actually forgot to add something up here, so let's scroll back up. And right here where the My Slider class begins, actually right before it, we're going to be adding a space. All right, so make sure to add that, and that's going to be it for the HTML. All right, for the CSS, I'm going to be bringing in a font that I want to use using the Google Font API, but this is completely optional. You do not need this. Go ahead and choose a different font if you want, or if you want to use the default font that comes with your VS Code, you can feel free to use that as well. If you want to use this one, go ahead and just copy this and you'll have access to this font. All right, let's set the margin of our elements to 0. Let's get access to the body, and we're going to change the color of our font to white. For the font family, we're going to change it to the one that I just brought in. And once again, this is completely optional. You can use a different font if you want. All right, let's get access to the slider section. We're going to give this a height of 500 pixels, and this is completely optional. You can change the height. You can make it, shorter. You can make it taller. It's completely up to you. And I'm just adding a border here so you can see that this is how tall this is. And you can actually copy this code and insert it right into your website. And as you can see, it's going to be an actual section of your website. All right, and that's why I'm adding this border, so you can see that you can do that. All right, now we're going to place all of this in the center. That way it's nice and centered. So we're going to use display flex together with justify content center and align item center. We're also going to change the background color to black here. All right, now let's get access to our container. We're going to give this a width of 1600 pixels, and we're going to set margin to auto. This is going to help us make it responsive on big screen sizes, and this is my little trick that I use. So out of 1600 pixels, I'm going to use 85% of that, and that's going to help me make it responsive, of course, on big screen sizes. The only problem with this is that because we are using a width of 1600, this is not going to be responsive on mobile devices. So we will have to add a media query down here, and we're going to give that one at a max width of 1600 pixels. We want to change the width of the container to 100%. All right, so now this is going to be responsive both on big screen sizes and on mobile devices. All right, now let's get access to the controller, which is where the title and the buttons are located, we want these buttons to be over here on the left. So let's use display flex together with justify content space between. All right, and for the icon that is located in the controls class, or with an ID of controls, which is where these two icons are located, we want to change the color to white and also the font size to 1 rem. All right, for the previous and next buttons, we're going to add a couple of different properties to make them look a little bit nicer, but this is completely optional. You can make these buttons look however you want them to look. So this is just an idea that I'm going to give you. You can use it if you want, or you can add your own properties in here. So width 30, I'm going to go with cursor pointer. I'm going to give these a border radius of 50% so they could be round. I'm going to remove the outline, and I'm going to add a transition of 0.7 seconds with an animation of ease in out, and that's for when we add the hover effect. All right, now let's add a border of 3 pixels, solid white, and a background color of black, and also a box shadow. So I'm going to go with 0.05 pixels, and I'm going to use the hex color code of BBB. All right, now we're going to add the hover effect to both of these buttons. All right, so when we hover these, we're going to change the border color to gray. All right, and let's check that out. So yeah, looks pretty cool. Go ahead and change that to a different color if you want. All right, for the slide img container, which is where the image is located, we are going to set the width to 100%, and I'm going to go with a height of 275 pixels. That's completely optional. You can make it taller or shorter, whatever you want. I'm going to go ahead and add a border so you can see what it looks like. All right, so this is where the image is going to go. I'll go ahead and remove that border before we are done. All right, of course, like I said, that's where the image is going to go. So we're going to use background position center and background size cover. And of course, we use those two properties every time that we're using background image to add an image to our container here. And we're going to be adding those images in a little bit. All right, let's use cursor pointer here as well. And we're also going to turn this into a flex box. So display flex, justify content center, and align item center, and that's going to place this in the center. All right, we're also going to use a transition of 0.5 seconds, and the reason we're doing that is so when we hover this, we'll have that box shadow take over the image. And let's go ahead and add that now. So slide img hover. So when we hover this, we're gonna add a box shadow of 0, 0, 0, 200 pixels. I'm gonna use I want to use white just to show you what's going on here, because if I use black, which is what I'm actually going to use, you won't be able to see this. So let me just show you what this is doing. And we also have to add inset, and that's what we're actually doing there. But I'm not going to use white, I'm going to use black. But feel free to use another color if you want. I just like to use black. All right, I'm going to go with 0.9 there. And you see how you can't see it because the background is black. That's why I made it white, so you can see what we're doing there. All right, now for the link, which is this link here that says learn more. We're going to remove the underline, so text decoration, none. We're going to use transform, scale 0, transition. We're going to use 0.8 seconds. Let's change the font size to 1.5 rem, and we're going to change the color to white, and we're also going to set opacity to 0 because we don't want to be able to see it. We just want to be able to see it when we hover over this. So let's go ahead and add the hover effect to the link. All right, so when we hover this, we want to set opacity to 1 so we can actually see it, and transform scale to 1. So now when we hover this, it's going to have this cool little animation. All right, and we're pretty much done. Now we just have to add the images. So for the first image, let's go ahead and use background image URL. I already have the URLs to the images that I'm going to be using for this project. I'm going to go ahead and just copy and paste them in here. If you want to use these, I'm going to leave a link in the description to all of these so you can just copy and paste them like this. But if you want to use your own images, feel free to do that as well. All right, so we're going to copy this 4 times. So Shift Alt 4 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to change this to image number 2. Let's copy this. All right, image number 3. Number 4. And image number 5. All right, and that's going to do it for the CSS. All right, now we're going to bring in the tiny slider so we can actually turn this into a slider. Before we do though, I forgot to remove the white border from the images. So let's go back to our CSS file and let's find the slide img class and let's remove this border. Okay. All right, let's finish this off. Now we're going to bring in the tiny slider, and the way we're going to do this is by creating a variable. We're going to call it slider, and we're going to use something called TNS. I'm sure this is short for tiny slider, and we have access to this because we brought in the tiny slider CDN. All right, and here is where we're going to indicate the settings that we want to give our slider. And the very first one we're going to use is this one called container. For this one, we have to indicate where the slides that we want to use in this slider are located. Well, we stored those slides in a class called mySlider. So just by doing this, this turns into a slider. And as you can see, they even give us these buttons, and this is already fully functional. But we don't want to use these default buttons. We want to use the ones that we created. And we also want to add a couple more options in here. So let's go ahead and do that. Right, the first one we're going to add is this one called slide by. So with this one, we get to indicate how many images do we want this to skip when we click on the next button. I'm going to go ahead and go with 1, but you can change that to 2, 3, whatever you want. All right, the next option we're going to use is speed. I like to use 400 milliseconds, but you can make that slower or faster, completely up to you. All right, now let's remove this navigation here, these little dots. So to remove those, we're going to use nav, and we're going to set that to false. All right, and now we're going to indicate that we do not want to use their default buttons. Instead, we want to use our default buttons. So we're going to set option control container to our controls, which we stored in a class with an ID name of controls. All right, and as you can see, the previous and next default buttons disappeared, and now we're able to use these. It's kind of interesting that they work because there's actually an option here to indicate the buttons that you want to use, which you do like this. So prev button, and in here we indicate that we want them to use our previous button, or the one that we gave a class of previous. And they also have one for next button, and this one we gave a class of next. But it's kind of interesting because these buttons were already working before you added these two options. So it's kind of interesting that they actually work without having to use this, even though they actually give you these two options so you can indicate the buttons that you want to use. Anyways, we're going to go ahead and just leave that there because this is technically the correct way to do it. And the final thing that we're going to add here is responsiveness. So let's type in responsive, and we have to indicate how many images do we want this slider to display depending on the pixels that the user is looking at. So let's say at 1600 pixels, we want there to be 4 images or items, as we have to indicate here. And we're also going to give this something called gutter. So gutter is basically padding between the images. So that's what we're going to add in there. All right, so that's at 1600 pixels. And then at 1024, I want to reduce the amount of images that we have displaying to 3 because the screen size is getting smaller, so I don't want there to be as many images. And I'm also going to include a gutter of 20 because if I don't include it, it is not going to use it. So I have to include it every time that I'm adding a new size there. All right, so let's move on to 768 pixels. At this point, I want there to be only 2 images, and let's go ahead and add the gutter as well. All right, and the final one that we're going to add is at 480 pixels. At this point, we only want there to be 1 image, and it's not necessary to add gutter because there's only 1 image on the screen. All right, so let's resize this. And as you can see, we have 4 images here. If we click on this, it's gonna slide by 1. And if you find this to be a little bit slow, it's because we are using these URL images that are actually pretty big. So I highly recommend for you to download the images and then resize them to this size. That way it's pretty faster. It's not going to be lagging at all. All right, let me resize this so you can see that this is completely responsive. So we have, I'm going to start this off at 4. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, and let's resize this. And as you can see, now there's 3 images, and then it's going to change to 2. And finally, it's going to change to 1. And I actually forgot to add a border radius here to give it round edges. So I'm just going to add that in here. So border radius 5 pixels, and that's going to make the image have round edges. All right, and that's going to be it for this tutorial. Please make sure to hit the like button if you found this useful, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thanks for watching.